Welcome to our podcast.
Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're talking about something that almost every English learner struggles with: vocabulary. More specifically, why do so many people spend years learning new words, yet still struggle to use them naturally? And more importantly, what's the most effective way to actually build a vocabulary that stays with you? To help us answer that question, I'm joined by language learning researcher and coach Dr. James Carter. James, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. And honestly, this is one of my favorite topics because vocabulary learning is surrounded by myths. A lot of people are working incredibly hard, but unfortunately, they're often using methods that aren't helping their brains learn efficiently.
That's fascinating, because I think most learners assume the solution is simple. Learn more words, study harder, memorize longer lists.
Exactly. And that's where the problem often begins, because vocabulary isn't really a quantity problem. It's a memory problem.
What do you mean by that?
Well, imagine I gave you a list of 100 strangers. Their names, their birthdays, their occupations. You could spend hours memorizing that list. But if you never meet those people, you'll probably forget most of them.
Right. Because they don't mean anything to me.
Exactly. Now, think about your closest friends. You didn't memorize them. You experienced them. You interacted with them. You built connections. Words work surprisingly similarly.
That's a really interesting comparison. So you're saying words aren't remembered because we study them, they're remembered because we connect with them?
That's a huge part of it. The brain is constantly asking one question: is this information worth keeping? And if a word never gets used, the brain often decides no.
Let's talk about something practical. What's one discovery from learning science that most people don't know about, but should?
Without question, retrieval practice.
What is that?
Most learners believe learning happens when information goes into the brain. Research suggests something very different. A large part of learning actually happens when information comes out of the brain.
Interesting. Can you explain that?
Of course. Let's imagine you learn the word achievement. Many learners will read it 10 times, maybe 20, maybe 50. But here's the problem. Reading creates familiarity, not necessarily memory.
So seeing something repeatedly doesn't guarantee learning.
Exactly. Instead, close the book, wait a few minutes, then ask yourself, what was that word I learned earlier? That effort, that struggle to remember, is where powerful learning happens.
That's interesting because most people hate struggling. They think struggling means they're failing.
Actually, in learning science, a certain amount of struggle is often a good sign.
Really?
Absolutely. Researchers sometimes call this a desirable difficulty. If something feels too easy, your brain often doesn't need to change. If remembering a word requires a little effort, the brain pays more attention, and stronger memory traces begin to form.
So forgetting isn't necessarily the enemy.
Exactly. In fact, many successful learners misunderstand forgetting completely. They think, I forgot the word. I failed. But often, the act of recovering a forgotten word strengthens memory more than seeing it 10 more times.
Let's imagine someone wants results as quickly as possible. What does your personal vocabulary routine look like?
It's surprisingly simple. I follow what I call the 3-step rule.
Okay, I'm listening.
Step 1. Encounter the word naturally. A book, a podcast, a conversation, a video. Somewhere meaningful.
Okay.
Step 2. Create a personal connection. Use the word in a sentence about your own life. Not somebody else's life. Your life.
Why does that matter?
Because personal relevance is one of the strongest memory signals we know. The brain remembers things that feel important to you.
That makes perfect sense.
Then step 3. Retrieve the word later without looking. Not immediately. Later. A few hours later. The next day. 3 days later. Every successful retrieval strengthens the memory.
You know, listening to you, I'm starting to realize something. Most people spend their energy collecting vocabulary.
Exactly. And collection isn't the same as acquisition.
I think a lot of learners need to hear that.
Absolutely. Because the goal isn't to know 10,000 words. The goal is to own them, to understand them, to recognize them, and to use them naturally when needed.
That's a completely different way of looking at vocabulary.
And once learners understand that, everything starts to change. Because vocabulary growth stops feeling like memorization and starts feeling like building relationships.
I love that idea. Building relationships with words. That's probably the perfect place to pause for today. James, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. Remember, don't focus on learning more words this week. Focus on remembering and using the words you already have. We'll see you next time. One thing I've noticed over the years is that understanding a concept and applying it successfully are often two very different things. In the first part of today's conversation, we explored the science behind vocabulary learning. We talked about memory, retrieval, context, and some of the common mistakes that cause learners to forget words much faster than they expect. But a question still remains. What does all of this actually look like in practice? Because it's one thing to understand the research. It's another thing to build habits that work in real life. So for the next part of today's episode, I wanted to bring in someone with a different perspective. Not a researcher, not a linguist, just someone who has spent years learning English and experimenting with different approaches to vocabulary. Someone who has experienced the frustration of forgetting words, made plenty of mistakes, and eventually found a system that worked. Michael Lee joins us now. Michael, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I've been listening to the conversation so far, and a lot of it resonated with me, especially the idea that learning more words doesn't necessarily mean remembering more words.
That's probably something many listeners can relate to. I know I can. Let's start at the beginning. When you first became serious about learning English, what was your approach to vocabulary?
Honestly, my approach was very traditional. Whenever I encountered a new word, I wrote it down, I looked up the definition, sometimes I added the translation, and then I moved on to the next word.
Which sounds reasonable. In fact, that's probably what many learners are still doing today.
Exactly. And to be fair, it wasn't completely ineffective. The problem was that I confused familiarity with mastery. I thought that because a word looked familiar, I had learned it. But later, when I needed that word in a conversation, it often wasn't there.
That's an interesting distinction. A word can feel familiar without actually being available when you need it.
Exactly. And it took me a surprisingly long time to realize that.
Was there a specific moment when that realization finally clicked? A moment when you started questioning the way you were studying vocabulary?
Yes, actually. And it happened during something very ordinary. I was listening to a podcast on my way home from work, and I noticed that I understood certain words immediately. Not because I had memorized them recently, but because I had encountered them again and again in meaningful situations. That was the moment I started wondering whether repetition alone was enough, or whether context was doing most of the work.
So, what was the biggest change you made?
I stopped trying to learn as many words as possible. Instead, I focused on using the words I had already learned. Whenever I encountered a useful word, I would try to use it in a sentence related to my own life. Then I'd look for it again in books, podcasts, or conversations. Over time, those words became much easier to remember.
So, the goal wasn't collecting vocabulary, it was building familiarity through repeated use.
Exactly. And once I understood that, vocabulary learning became much less stressful. I stopped worrying about how many words I was learning each day and started focusing on how many words I could actually use.
That's a simple idea, but I think it's one that many learners need to hear.
I agree. Most people don't need more vocabulary. They need more interaction with the vocabulary they already know.
That's a great place to end. Michael, thank you for sharing your experience.
Thank you for having me.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. I want to start today's episode with something I read recently. The sentence was surprisingly simple. It said, "Most people don't ruin their lives all at once. They do it gradually."
That's uncomfortable. Because it sounds true.
Exactly. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "You know what? I'd like to make my life worse today."
Most people are trying to do the opposite.
Right. People want better health, better relationships, more confidence, more happiness. And yet, sometimes years go by, and somehow life feels smaller, not bigger.
Because destruction is usually quiet.
What do you mean?
People imagine destruction as something dramatic, a disaster, a crisis, a huge mistake. But many forms of self-destruction are almost invisible.
Invisible?
Yeah. They're small enough that they don't feel dangerous. At least not today.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Ignoring something you know needs attention. Just once. Not a big deal. Then doing it again tomorrow. And the next day. And the next month.
So the danger isn't the action itself, it's the repetition.
Exactly. Most people underestimate repetition.
What's the most common way people slowly damage their lives?
I don't think it's laziness.
Really? A lot of people would probably say laziness.
I know. But I think it's something deeper. I think it's avoidance.
Avoidance?
Avoiding difficult conversations. Avoiding difficult decisions. Avoiding uncomfortable truths. Avoiding responsibilities. Avoiding uncertainty. Avoiding the things that could actually change our lives.
That's interesting, because avoidance often feels harmless.
Exactly. That's why it's dangerous. Most destructive habits feel good in the short term. That's what makes them attractive.
If they felt terrible immediately,
Nobody would do them.
Exactly. You know, this reminds me of something. Sometimes people talk about creating the life they want, but very few people talk about creating the life they don't want.
That's a fascinating observation.
Because whether we're paying attention or not, we're still building something. Every day.
Absolutely. Every action is a vote.
A vote?
A vote for the kind of person you're becoming. Not who you wish you were. Not who you plan to be someday. Who you're becoming right now.
That's powerful. And honestly, a little uncomfortable.
The truth often is.
What's one lie people tell themselves that causes a lot of damage?
I'll start later.
That's a popular one.
Very popular. Because later feels responsible. It feels reasonable. It feels harmless. But the problem is that later often becomes a permanent location. People don't decide to give up on their goals. They postpone them. Again and again until years pass.
That's a scary thought.
What's scary isn't that time passes. Time always passes. What's scary is realizing that you've been waiting for a version of yourself that was never coming.
Wow.
A more confident version. A more motivated version. A more disciplined version. A version that somehow wakes up one day and finds everything easy. But that's not usually how change happens.
Then how does it happen?
Often, it begins with an honest conversation. The kind most people avoid having with themselves.
You know, when people talk about changing their lives, they usually talk about actions, new habits, new goals, new routines. But very few people talk about honesty.
That's true. And honestly, I think self-improvement often starts with honesty long before it starts with discipline.
What kind of honesty?
The uncomfortable kind. The kind where you stop asking, what do I want? And start asking, what am I actually doing?
That's a very different question.
Completely different. Because most people have clear goals. They know what they want. Better health, better relationships, more confidence, more freedom. The problem usually isn't the goal. The problem is the gap.
The gap between what we say matters and what we spend our days doing.
Exactly. And here's the strange thing. Most people don't intentionally create that gap. They drift into it.
What do you mean by drift?
Imagine you're on a boat. You move the steering wheel 1 degree. That's it. Just 1 degree.
Doesn't sound like much.
It doesn't. For 5 minutes, you won't notice anything. For an hour, maybe not. But after enough time, you're somewhere completely different.
That's actually a little unsettling.
Because life works like that. People worry about catastrophic mistakes, huge failures, massive setbacks. But most lives aren't changed by one dramatic event. They're changed by small directions, repeated for years.
So the danger isn't always crashing. Sometimes it's drifting?
Exactly. And drifting feels safe. That's what makes it dangerous.
What's one form of drifting that's especially common today?
Living in reaction mode.
Reaction mode?
Yeah. Think about an average day. You wake up, check your phone, see a notification, reply to a message, watch a video, read a comment, answer an email, open another app. Before you know it, the day is responding to you instead of you directing the day.
Wow. I've never heard it explained like that.
Most people don't have an attention problem. They have an ownership problem. Everyone is fighting for your attention. Apps, algorithms, advertisements, news, notifications. The question isn't whether your attention will be used. It will.
The real question is who gets to use it.
Exactly. And many people accidentally spend their lives helping other people achieve goals, while slowly forgetting their own.
You know, that reminds me of a question I heard recently, and I couldn't stop thinking about it.
What was it?
If someone watched a video of your last 30 days, what would they think your priorities are?
That's a powerful question.
Because they wouldn't hear our intentions. They wouldn't hear our plans. They wouldn't hear our excuses. They would only see our actions.
Exactly. And sometimes, that's where reality becomes very clear.
Because what we say matters to us, and what we repeatedly do aren't always the same thing.
Right. And that's not a reason to feel guilty. It's a reason to become aware.
Can we talk about distraction for a minute? Because people hear that word all the time, but I feel like there's something deeper there.
I think there is. Most people think distraction steals time, but I don't think time is the biggest thing it steals.
What does it steal?
Clarity.
Clarity?
Yeah. Because the most important decisions in life usually don't happen in busy moments. They happen in quiet moments.
When you're alone with your thoughts.
Exactly. And here's the problem. Many people rarely experience that anymore.
Because there's always something to consume.
Always. A video, a song, a notification, a message. And to be clear, those things aren't bad.
Right. We're literally recording a podcast right now.
Exactly. The issue isn't consumption. The issue is never leaving room for reflection.
That's interesting. Because reflection sounds simple, but most people don't do it consistently.
And yet, it might be one of the highest return activities available.
Why?
Because reflection allows you to notice patterns. And once you notice a pattern, you can change it.
But if you never notice it, you keep repeating it.
Exactly. Imagine making the same mistake for 10 years. Not because you wanted to, not because you were incapable of changing, simply because you never stopped long enough to see it.
That's a powerful idea.
The quality of your life is often connected to the quality of the questions you ask yourself. And many people are so busy answering everyone else's questions, they never ask their own.
Wow. That's going to stay with me.
Me too. Because every once in a while, life gives us a chance to pause, to look around, and to ask, is this direction actually taking me where I want to go? And that question might change more than people realize.
You know, there's something I've noticed. A lot of people are waiting.
Waiting for what?
A better version of themselves. The disciplined version, the confident version, the motivated version. The version that finally has everything figured out.
That's one of the most common traps, and it's a very convincing one.
Because it sounds reasonable.
Exactly. People think, when I feel ready, I'll start. When I'm more confident, I'll try. When life becomes less busy, I'll focus. But life has a strange habit. It keeps moving.
And that future version never arrives.
Not in the way people imagine. Because confidence isn't usually the cause of action. Very often, it's the result of action.
That's interesting. I think many people believe it's the other way around.
Most do. But if you look closely at almost anything worthwhile in life, you'll find people who started before they felt ready. Not because they were fearless, but because they understood something important.
What's that?
The person they're waiting to become is being built by the choices they're making today.
You know, if someone listening feels stuck right now, maybe overwhelmed, maybe disappointed in themselves, what's one question they should ask?
I'd ask this: what am I repeatedly doing that I already know is hurting me?
That's a powerful question.
Because deep down, most people already know. They know the habit. They know the excuse. They know the pattern.
The problem isn't awareness. It's honesty.
Exactly. And the good news is, you don't have to fix everything. You don't need a completely new life tomorrow.
You just need to stop feeding the thing that's pulling you in the wrong direction.
That's often enough to begin.
I think that's another misconception people have. They're waiting for a breakthrough moment.
A life-changing revelation. A perfect plan. A sudden burst of motivation.
A movie scene.
Exactly. But most lives don't change that way.
How do they change?
Quietly. A different decision today. A better choice tomorrow. A conversation you've been avoiding. A responsibility you finally accept. A habit you finally stop defending.
Nothing dramatic.
Usually not. The biggest changes often look very ordinary in the moment.
You know, when people hear a title like Stop Destroying Your Life, they probably imagine we're going to talk about massive mistakes, huge failures, catastrophic decisions.
But that's rarely how it happens.
Right. Today's conversation reminded me that self-destruction is often much quieter. It's the things we postpone, the truths we avoid, the distractions we hide behind, the habits we keep excusing.
And that's also good news. Because if small things can slowly damage a life, small things can slowly improve one too.
I like that.
You don't need to become a different person overnight. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to wait for a future version of yourself.
You just need to be honest enough to notice what's happening.
And brave enough to take one small step in a better direction.
So, if there's one thing I'd like everyone listening to remember, it's this. Your life is not shaped only by the big decisions. It's shaped by the small things you repeat, day after day, year after year.
Pay attention to those. They matter more than most people realize.
And maybe tonight, instead of asking, what do I want from life? Ask, what direction am I moving in?
That's a great question.
All right. That's all for today's episode. Thanks for spending this time with us. Take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you next time.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're doing well. I want to start today's episode with a message from one of our listeners. The message said, I've been learning English for years. I understand quite a lot. I can read, I can listen, but I still don't think in English. I always translate, and because of that, my speaking feels slow.
That's a great question. And honestly, it's one of the most common concerns among language learners.
I think a lot of people have heard the advice, you need to think in English. But nobody really explains what that means.
Exactly. People hear it all the time. Think in English. Stop translating. Use English directly. But very few people explain how the brain actually gets there.
So let's start there. What does it actually mean to think in English?
Well, the first thing I'd say is that many learners have the wrong picture in their minds.
They imagine that fluent speakers never translate, not even once.
Which sounds impossible.
Because it is. Even advanced speakers sometimes translate. Even bilingual people do it.
Really?
Absolutely. The goal isn't to eliminate translation completely. The goal is to reduce your dependence on it.
That's a very different idea.
It is. Because many learners think, if I still translate sometimes, I'm doing something wrong. That's usually not true.
So, what's actually happening inside the brain?
Let's imagine two possible routes. Route number one. You have an idea, you think about it in your native language, then you translate it, then you speak.
Which is what most learners do.
Exactly. Now, let's look at route number two. You have an idea, and English appears immediately. No translation step.
That sounds much faster.
Because it is. And that's what people usually mean when they say thinking in English.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say I show you a picture of a dog. What happens?
I see a dog.
Exactly. The image is already connected directly to the English word.
Interesting. So the goal is to create more direct connections.
Exactly. And that's where many learners make a mistake.
What mistake?
They learn English through translation only. Every new word gets connected to a native language word, but it never gets connected to a real image, a real situation, a real experience.
So the brain becomes dependent on translation?
Exactly. Translation becomes the bridge, and eventually, the bridge slows everything down.
Okay, let's make this practical. Suppose somebody listening wants to start thinking in English more often. What should they do?
I usually recommend a very simple experiment. For the next 24 hours, don't try to think about everything in English.
Really?
Really? That's too difficult. Instead, choose one activity. Just one.
Like what?
Making coffee, cooking breakfast, walking to work, taking a shower. And during that activity, describe what's happening in English.
So something like, I'm making coffee. The water is hot. I need more sugar.
Exactly. Simple language. No pressure, no perfect grammar.
And what's happening inside the brain when we do that?
Something very important. You're training English to become a tool for thought, not just a subject to study.
That's a powerful distinction.
It changes everything because the brain starts connecting English to daily life instead of connecting English only to textbooks.
You know, that idea really stood out to me. English becoming a tool for thought instead of just a subject to study. Because I think that's where a lot of learners get stuck. They spend years learning English, but very little time actually using English to think. Why does that happen?
Because studying feels productive. And to be fair, it is productive. You learn new words, you learn new grammar, you understand more. Those are all good things. But there's something interesting happening. Many learners spend most of their time putting information into the brain. Very little time is spent taking information out.
And speaking depends on taking information out.
Exactly. The brain gets better at whatever it practices. If you spend 2 years recognizing English, you'll become very good at recognizing English. If you spend 2 years producing English, you'll become much better at producing English. The skill follows the training.
That's actually a really simple idea, but I don't think many people think about language that way.
Most people don't. They assume that if they keep feeding information into the brain, speaking will automatically improve. Sometimes it does, but usually much more slowly than people expect.
So, if someone wants to think in English, what's the biggest mistake they should avoid?
Trying to think about complex things too early. That's probably the biggest one.
What do you mean?
A learner hears the advice, think in English, then immediately tries to discuss politics or philosophy or some complicated topic. And within 30 seconds, they're frustrated.
That sounds familiar.
Because it's a little like learning to ride a bicycle and starting on a mountain.
Not the easiest place to start.
Exactly. The brain learns best when the challenge is manageable. Start with simple thoughts, simple observations, simple descriptions. Those are easier to automate.
Something I've always wondered, when fluent speakers think, what are they actually thinking about? Because I don't imagine people walk around all day giving speeches in their heads.
No, definitely not. That's a common misconception.
Good, because that sounded exhausting.
What fluent speakers often do is much simpler. They're constantly connecting language to experiences, to situations, to emotions, to observations.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine you're walking outside. You notice the weather. You notice traffic. You notice a dog crossing the street. Those tiny observations can become language. Not because you're forcing yourself, but because English has become connected to everyday life.
So it's less about translating thoughts and more about experiencing things through English.
That's a much better way to think about it.
Something else I've heard people talk about is chunks. Language chunks. Why do they matter so much?
Because the brain loves shortcuts. Imagine you're driving somewhere familiar. You don't consciously think about every movement, every turn, every action. Many things become automatic. Language works similarly.
So chunks reduce the amount of thinking required.
Exactly. Let's take a simple phrase. To be honest. A fluent speaker doesn't build that phrase word by word. The entire chunk appears instantly.
Almost like one unit.
That's exactly what it is. And fluent speakers have thousands of these units. That's one reason they sound faster. Not because they're thinking faster, because they're retrieving larger pieces of language.
That's fascinating. I think many learners assume fluent speakers have some special ability.
Most of the time, they're just using more efficient language patterns.
Let's talk about something interesting. The voice inside our heads. Does that matter?
In your inner voice.
Yes. If your inner voice only uses your native language, then every English sentence begins with translation.
Which slows the process down. Right. But if English starts appearing in your inner voice more often, the distance between thought and speech becomes shorter.
So how do people build that English inner voice?
One of my favorite methods is surprisingly simple. At the end of the day, replay your day in English.
That's it?
That's it. You don't need perfect grammar. You don't need perfect vocabulary. Just describe what happened, what you did, who you met, what surprised you, what went well, what didn't.
Almost like telling yourself a story.
Yes. And over time, the brain starts building stronger pathways. English becomes more available, more automatic, more familiar.
And that brings up another question I've always had. If somebody only has 15 minutes a day, what's the most effective way to train their brain to think in English?
15 minutes is actually more than enough if those 15 minutes are used well.
That's probably good news for a lot of people, because not everyone has 2 or 3 hours a day.
And honestly,
Most people don't need 2 or 3 hours. Consistency matters much more.
So, what would those 15 minutes look like?
I divide them into 3 parts. 5 minutes, simple.
Okay, let's start with the first 5 minutes.
The first 5 minutes are for observation. Look around you, describe what you see, what you're doing, what you're planning to do next. Keep it simple.
So, we're training English to connect with real life.
Exactly, because language is much easier to remember when it's attached to something real.
What about the second 5 minutes?
Questions. Ask yourself questions, then answer them.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. What am I working on right now? What was the best part of my day? What do I want to learn this month? What would I do if I had an extra day off? Simple questions, but they force the brain to generate language.
And the final 5 minutes?
Reflection. Talk about your day, your plans, something you recently learned, something that surprised you. Anything. The topic matters less than the habit.
You know, as we've been talking, I'm starting to notice a pattern.
What's that?
Almost everything you've recommended today involves creating language, not consuming language.
That's true. And there's a reason for that.
Which is?
Because many learners already consume a lot of English. They watch videos, they listen to podcasts, they read articles. Those activities are valuable, very valuable.
Absolutely.
But at some point, the brain needs to practice creating language too. That's where many learners spend the least amount of time. And often, that's the missing piece.
So the goal isn't to stop listening or stop reading.
Not at all. The goal is balance. Input helps build knowledge. Output helps build access. You need both.
Before we finish, there's one more thing I'd like to ask. A lot of learners say, I'll start speaking when my English is better. What do you think about that?
I understand why people feel that way. But there's a problem with that idea.
What's the problem?
Speaking isn't only the result of learning. Speaking is part of the learning process.
That's an important distinction.
Very important. Because if you wait until you feel ready, you may end up waiting a very long time. Fluency isn't something that suddenly appears one morning. It's built gradually, conversation by conversation, day by day.
You know, when we started this conversation, I thought we were going to talk about speaking.
And somehow we ended up talking about thinking.
Exactly. But maybe that's the point.
I think it is.
Because speaking doesn't begin when we open our mouths. It begins much earlier. It begins with attention, with observation, with small thoughts throughout the day.
And every time you choose to use English for one of those thoughts, you're training the brain. Even if it doesn't feel dramatic, even if nobody else notices.
I like that. Because people often imagine progress as something big, something obvious.
When in reality, most progress is quiet. A slightly faster response, a sentence that comes more easily, a conversation that feels a little more comfortable than the last one.
And those small improvements add up.
That's how fluency grows, not through one breakthrough moment, but through hundreds of ordinary moments.
So, if you're listening today, maybe don't focus on thinking in English all day. Maybe that's too much.
Start smaller.
Agreeing. Much smaller. Describe your coffee. Describe your commute. Describe your plans for tomorrow. Ask yourself a few questions. Reflect on your day.
And do it consistently. That's the important part.
Because the goal isn't to impress anyone. The goal is to make English feel a little more natural tomorrow than it feels today.
Exactly.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome to today's video. If you're here, maybe you're looking for something, understanding, comfort, or just a moment to breathe. Today, we're going to talk about mental health, but in a way that feels simple and natural. No complicated theories, no overwhelming advice, just a conversation, like a friend talking to another friend. This video is also a chance for you to practice your English listening skills. As you listen, don't worry about catching every single word. Just focus on the meaning, the emotions behind the words, and let it all flow naturally. Have you ever felt exhausted? Not just physically, but mentally? Like your mind is carrying a weight that no one else can see? Some days you wake up, stare at the ceiling, and ask yourself, am I really okay? Mental health isn't something distant or abstract. It's as real as the air we breathe, as important as the beat of our hearts. Yet so many of us ignore it, push it aside, or pretend that everything is fine, until it isn't. We live in a world that celebrates being busy, being productive, being strong. But real strength isn't about ignoring our struggles. It's about recognizing them and allowing ourselves to feel. It's okay to say, I'm not okay. It's okay to take a step back. I used to think that stress was just a part of life. That feeling overwhelmed meant I needed to work harder. But the more I ignored my feelings, the worse they got. Until one day I realized, if I didn't take care of my mind, who would? Taking care of our mental health doesn't always mean making huge changes. Sometimes the smallest things can have the biggest impact. Have you ever noticed how different you feel after a good night's sleep? Or how your mind clears up when you step outside and breathe fresh air? These moments matter. Simple habits, like drinking enough water, moving your body, taking deep breaths, can help more than we realize. And then, there's the power of talking. Sharing your thoughts, even if it's just writing them down, can lighten the weight you carry. And let's not forget the importance of saying no. No to things that drain you. No to expectations that don't serve you. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary. One of the hardest things about struggling with mental health is feeling like you're alone. But the truth is you're not. Someone out there understands what you're going through. Someone out there has felt the same fears, the same doubts, the same loneliness. And if you ever need help, there are people who care, who are willing to listen. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to pretend. Healing takes time. Growth takes time. And no matter where you are on your journey, you are enough. Just as you are. Sometimes, we get so caught up in our daily routines that we forget to check in with ourselves. We push through exhaustion, ignore stress, and tell ourselves that we'll deal with it later. But the truth is, our minds don't work like machines. They need care, attention, and moments of stillness. Have you ever sat in silence and truly listened to your own thoughts? Not the loud worries or the endless to-do lists, but the quiet voice underneath, the one that asks for rest. For understanding, for kindness, we often give kindness to others without hesitation. But when it comes to ourselves, we're much harsher. We judge our emotions, tell ourselves we shouldn't feel this way, and compare our struggles to those of others. Other people have it worse. I shouldn't complain. I just need to be stronger. But strength isn't about ignoring pain. It's about acknowledging it and learning how to heal. Healing doesn't always look like a grand transformation. Sometimes it's as simple as allowing yourself to slow down. To take a moment in the morning before reaching for your phone, to enjoy a meal without rushing, to go for a walk without needing a destination. Our minds need space, space to breathe, space to process, space to be free from constant pressure. In a world that tells us to always be productive, rest can feel like a waste of time. But the reality is, rest is not a luxury. It's fuel. A car can't run without gas. A phone can't function without charging. And our minds can't keep going without moments of recovery. Think about the last time you truly rested. Not just slept, but rested. When you let yourself be present in the moment, without feeling guilty. When you did something simply because it made you happy, not because it was productive or useful. Those moments matter. They remind us that we are more than what we achieve. And then there's connection, the way we feel when we open up to someone who truly listens. Sometimes we hesitate to share our struggles because we don't want to be a burden. But the right people, the ones who care, don't see us as a burden. They want to be there, just as we would want to be there for them. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to reach out, even if you don't have the right words. Sometimes all you need to say is, "I'm feeling overwhelmed," and that's enough. You don't have to explain everything. You don't have to have a perfect reason for why you feel the way you do. Your feelings are valid simply because they exist. There's a quiet kind of strength in allowing yourself to be vulnerable, in admitting that you don't have all the answers, in recognizing that healing isn't a straight line, but a journey with ups and downs. Some days will be better than others, and that's okay. What matters is that you keep going, and as you move forward, remember to be patient with yourself. Growth takes time. Healing takes time, and you are allowed to take that time. You are allowed to move at your own pace. We often think of mental health as something separate from our daily lives, something to focus on only when things get really bad. It's not just about overcoming struggles. It's about creating a life where our minds can thrive, not just survive. Have you ever paid attention to the way you speak to yourself? If you make a mistake, do you say, "That was silly, but I'll do better next time"? Or do you immediately think, "I'm such a failure. I can never get anything right"? The words we use with ourselves matter. Our minds absorb them like a sponge, shaping how we see ourselves and the world around us. If a friend was struggling, you wouldn't tell them they're not good enough. You wouldn't say they should just get over it, or that their feelings don't matter. So why do we say these things to ourselves? What if, instead of criticism, we practiced self-compassion? What if every time we felt overwhelmed, we reminded ourselves, "I am doing my best and that is enough"? One of the most powerful things we can do for our mental well-being is to create an environment that nurtures us. This doesn't always mean making big changes. Sometimes it's as simple as setting up small habits that bring us peace. Think about the spaces you spend the most time in. Do they make you feel calm or chaotic? Are they filled with things that inspire you, or do they drain your energy? A cluttered space can lead to a cluttered mind. Something as small as organizing your desk, lighting a candle, or adding a plant to your room can create a sense of peace. Beyond our physical space, the people we surround ourselves with also have a huge impact on our mental state. Have you ever noticed how some people make you feel lighter, while others leave you feeling drained? Protecting your energy is not selfish, it's necessary. You don't have to be available to everyone all the time. It's okay to step back from relationships that feel one-sided or toxic. The people in your life should lift you up, not weigh you down. And then there's the way we spend our time. When was the last time you did something purely because it made you happy, without worrying about being productive? In a world that values constant achievement, taking time for joy can feel like a waste. But joy is not a luxury. It's fuel for the soul. Maybe it's reading a book, painting, listening to music, or just sitting quietly with a cup of tea. Maybe it's watching the sunset, playing with a pet, or laughing over a silly joke. These small moments of happiness add up. They remind us that life is not just about responsibilities and deadlines. It's also about experiencing beauty, love, and connection. And speaking of connection, have you ever noticed how much lighter your heart feels after a genuine conversation? Sometimes, just knowing that someone understands can make all the difference. But the hardest part is often reaching out. We hesitate because we don't want to be a burden, or we think no one will understand. But more often than not, the people who love us want to help. They just don't always know what we need until we tell them. Even if you don't feel comfortable talking to someone yet, writing your thoughts down can be just as powerful. Putting emotions into words, even in a private journal, helps process them. It's a way of acknowledging what you're feeling instead of letting those emotions build up inside. Another thing that can transform the way we experience life is gratitude. And I don't mean forcing ourselves to be positive all the time. That's unrealistic. But when we make it a habit to notice small moments of goodness, it shifts our perspective. Gratitude doesn't erase problems, but it helps us remember that even in difficult times, there is still light. It can be as simple as taking a moment at the end of the day to think about 3 good things that happened. Maybe you heard a song you liked. Maybe you had a kind interaction with a stranger. Maybe the weather was nice. These little moments matter. They are reminders that no matter how heavy life feels, there is always something worth holding on to. And finally, let's talk about acceptance. Sometimes, the hardest thing to do is accept where we are, especially when we feel stuck. We think, I'll be happy when I have this job, this relationship, this achievement. But the truth is, if we're always waiting for something external to make us feel okay, we'll never truly find peace. Real peace comes from within. It comes from knowing that even if we're not where we want to be yet, we are still enough. It comes from allowing ourselves to grow at our own pace, without comparing our journey to others. We often think of mental health as something we need to fix, as if feeling sad, anxious, or lost means something is wrong with us. But what if we change the way we look at it? What if, instead of seeing emotions as problems, we saw them as messages, signals from our mind and body telling us what we need? Imagine if we treated our emotions the way we treat physical pain. When we feel thirsty, we drink water. When we feel tired, we sleep. But when we feel lonely, overwhelmed, or unmotivated, we often try to ignore it, distract ourselves, or tell ourselves that we shouldn't feel this way. But emotions don't disappear just because we push them away. They stay, waiting to be acknowledged. Think of emotions like waves in the ocean. Some are small, barely noticeable. Others are strong, pulling us under. But no wave lasts forever. It rises, it peaks, and it falls. The same is true for emotions. No feeling, no matter how overwhelming, will last forever. And when we stop resisting and start accepting them, they pass through us more gently. But how do we do this? How do we sit with difficult emotions instead of fighting them? It starts with curiosity. Instead of thinking, I shouldn't feel this way, try asking, why do I feel this way? Instead of judging yourself, approach your emotions with kindness, like you would for a friend. Sometimes emotions are linked to deeper needs. Maybe your stress is telling you that you need a break. Maybe your loneliness is a sign that you need more connection. Maybe your sadness is a reminder to slow down and process something painful. When we listen to what our emotions are telling us, we can respond with care instead of resistance. But accepting emotions doesn't mean letting them control us. It's about finding balance, feeling what we need to feel, but not letting it define who we are. One way to create this balance is through mindfulness. And no, mindfulness doesn't mean sitting in meditation for hours. It simply means being present, fully experiencing a moment, without rushing to the next thing. Have you ever eaten a meal while scrolling on your phone, only to realize later that you barely tasted it? Or walked somewhere while thinking about 100 other things, barely noticing your surroundings? When we're always in our heads, we miss out on life happening right in front of us. Try this. The next time you drink a cup of tea or coffee, really focus on it. Notice the warmth, the aroma, the taste. When you go outside, pay attention to the way the air feels, the sounds around you, the colors you see. These small moments of presence can ground us, helping us feel calmer and more connected to the world. Another powerful way to care for your mental health is movement. Not exercise for the sake of appearance or achievement, but movement that feels good. Have you ever noticed how much lighter your mind feels after a walk? Or how dancing to your favorite song can shift your entire mood? Movement isn't just about the body. It's a way of releasing emotions, resetting the mind, and reminding ourselves that we are alive. And then there's the power of creativity. When was the last time you created something just for the joy of it? When you were a child, you probably drew pictures, told stories, or made up silly songs without worrying if they were good. But as we get older, we start thinking that creativity has to have a purpose, that if we're not good at something, it's not worth doing. But creativity is not about talent. It's about expression. Writing, painting, singing, crafting, these things help us process emotions in ways that words alone sometimes can't. Even if no one ever sees what you create, even if it's just for yourself, the act of creating can be deeply healing. Of course, taking care of mental health isn't just about what we do. It's also about what we allow. What kind of information do we consume daily? What kind of energy do we surround ourselves with? Think about the content you take in. Social media, news, entertainment. Does it lift you up, inspire you, make you feel good? Or does it leave you feeling drained, insecure, or hopeless? The things we consume shape our thoughts more than we realize. If we're constantly surrounded by negativity, comparison, or unrealistic expectations, it's no wonder we feel exhausted. That doesn't mean avoiding reality or pretending everything is perfect. It just means being mindful of what you give your attention to. Follow people who inspire you. Read things that make you think in a positive way. Spend time in spaces that make you feel good. The things we feed our minds are just as important as the things we feed our bodies. And finally, let's talk about self-worth. So many of us tie our worth to external things. How much we achieve, how we look, how others see us. But what if we separated self-worth from all of that? What if, instead of thinking I am valuable because I do this, we simply thought, I am valuable because I exist? You don't have to prove yourself to deserve kindness. You don't have to earn love. You don't have to accomplish anything to be worthy. If you've been feeling lost, if you've been doubting yourself, if you've been struggling, know this. You are enough. Right now, exactly as you are. You don't need to have everything figured out. You don't need to be perfect. You are doing the best you can, and that is enough. So take a deep breath. Let go of expectations that don't serve you. Treat yourself with kindness. And remember, no matter what you're going through, you are not alone. When we think about mental health, we often focus on the big things, overcoming anxiety, dealing with stress, finding happiness. But sometimes the smallest habits make the biggest difference. The way we start our mornings, the words we say to ourselves, the little choices we make each day, these all shape our well-being more than we realize. Have you ever noticed how the first few minutes of your day set the tone for everything that follows? If you wake up and immediately check your phone, reading stressful emails or scrolling through social media, your mind is already in a state of reaction. But if you start your morning with something calming, stretching, deep breathing, or simply sitting in silence for a moment, you give yourself space to ease into the day. And then there's the power of small, intentional breaks. Many of us push through the day without stopping, thinking that resting will make us less productive. But in reality, short breaks can actually make us more focused and energized. Something as simple as stepping outside for fresh air, drinking a glass of water, or closing your eyes for a minute can reset your mind. Another thing that deeply impacts mental health is the way we handle setbacks. We all experience failure, rejection, and disappointment. But the way we respond to them makes all the difference. Instead of seeing setbacks as proof that we're not good enough, what if we saw them as part of growth? Think about a time you failed at something. Maybe you didn't get the job you wanted, or a plan didn't go the way you expected. At the moment, it probably felt discouraging. But looking back, did it teach you something? Did it lead you in a new direction? Sometimes, what feels like failure is actually redirection, guiding us toward something even better. And then there's comparison, one of the biggest sources of unhappiness. It's so easy to look at other people's lives, especially on social media, and feel like we're falling behind. We see their achievements, their happiness, their success, and we wonder, why am I not there yet? But here's the thing, we are all on different timelines. Just because someone else is succeeding doesn't mean you are failing. And just because your journey looks different doesn't mean you're not making progress. A flower doesn't rush to bloom just because the one next to it already has. It grows at its own pace in its own time, and so do you. Instead of comparing yourself to others, try comparing yourself to your past self. Are you kinder than you were a year ago? More understanding? Have you learned new things? Overcome challenges? Grown in ways you didn't expect? These are the things that truly matter. And speaking of growth, let's talk about the way we handle emotions. Not just the difficult ones, but also the good ones. Many of us are quick to dwell on negative feelings but struggle to fully embrace positive ones. Have you ever had a moment of happiness, only for your mind to immediately think, this won't last or something bad is probably going to happen next? This tendency to downplay joy is something we learn over time, often as a way to protect ourselves from disappointment. But what if, instead of fearing that happiness won't last, we allowed ourselves to enjoy it fully, even if just for a moment? The next time you feel joy, even for something small, pause. Let yourself soak it in. Maybe it's the warmth of the sun on your skin. Maybe it's the laughter of a loved one. Maybe it's the feeling of being completely lost in a song you love. Whatever it is, let yourself feel it without holding back. Because these little moments of joy, they add up. And they remind us that even in the hardest times, there is still light. And finally, let's talk about self-acceptance. Many of us spend our whole lives trying to fix ourselves, thinking that we need to be more, do more, change more before we can finally feel good enough. But what if we are already enough? What if, instead of constantly trying to become someone else, we focused on embracing who we already are? Self-acceptance doesn't mean giving up on growth. It simply means recognizing that you are worthy, even as you evolve. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be you. So as you move forward, be gentle with yourself. Celebrate the small victories. Give yourself permission to rest. Let yourself feel. And most importantly, remind yourself, every single day, that you are enough.